Obviously, we don't use the tablecloth for our kids that come in to do their homework. But it was interesting. I was thinking this morning. I'm Debbie Rosen. I am the founder and owner. This is Lindsay Tom. She is the center director and executive function coach. She also is assistant technology resources here at Texas County. And so we are really happy that you're here today. And for those of you who are joining us online, I was thinking this morning that I read several years ago, and it may be good for all of our extra time we might have on our hands, a book that's very relevant today. It's called The Gift of an Ordinary Day. And it was a really fantastic book. And of course, one of the messages, as you can tell by the title, is the fact that ordinary days where we take our kids to the bus stop and drop them off and fight with them about their homework, those become very precious days when they're not around anymore. And I think we're all kind of going through this together right now, thinking about how we miss sometimes the little ordinary things, like when we have 3 times as many people coming to the study pro or not having to be worried about it, which I know we're all appropriately so. So anyway, we hope that for the next hour and 15 minutes or so, we can keep everybody's mind here in the present and provide some really valuable information. And that we can help share a little joy, bring a little joy back to everybody's life who might be a little bit stressed out by the goings on right now. So we are a study skills, executive function and study skills center. So,
my friend said Mercury retrograde ended on Monday, but I don't know.
There we go. Okay, so we are an executive function center, and that should say process versus content, but the content is just flying out. But we are an executive function center, and that means that we talk about the concept of process versus content. And today what we thought we would do, because of the subject and talking about behavior, is really understanding a little bit more about what are executive functions and what's the idea of process versus content. As we know, and I've said many times, content, of course, is the math, the science, the history, all of the things that we're learning in school. But the process is kind of the how. So do I remember to bring my books home? Do I remember to write my homework down? Do I know how to chunk up that paper? Do I know how to take a paper that's due or something that's due, a project that's due 3 weeks from now, and work backwards on that? These are things that are very, very complex skills. And so we're going to talk a little bit today about the difference between, or at least a little bit more on the process side, and what some of the executive functions are, which are different than study skills that help us to accomplish some of the tasks that I just talked about.
Exactly. And those over my career. And when I started as a special education teacher, and people would ask me like, "Oh, what do you do?" And I was like, "Oh, I started in kindergarten, first, second grade." The answer would always be, "Oh, you have so much patience. So you must have so much patience." And so now when I introduce myself and I say, "Oh, I'm an executive function coach," they, "Oh, you must be so organized," right? That's the one thing when we picture when we say executive function. It's like organized, right? And I have to bite my tongue because I don't have a whole lot of inhibition with some of this. But with that, I want to say yes, but there's a lot of different domains with executive function, right? And just because I really don't want to set the precedent that as an executive function coach, I have organization figured out perfectly all 100% of the time in my life, right? We all have strengths, even as adults, even with our frontal lobes completely fully developed, we still have strengths in some of these areas. And then how we approach it here at the Study Pro, or we have areas where we need strategies to compensate for those areas that are lesser strengths. And so someone wanted to point out, like, the inhibition, that ability to ignore a distraction, it's kind of like the big broad term about it. So a thought pops into our head and we can resist acting on that thought. And so the real obvious one that comes into mind is, can they resist YouTube, or can they resist Minecraft, or can they resist my phone? And that's really hard for adults and kids. But there's also a little bit of inhibition that, okay, well, I just saw my teacher email me and it popped up, but I was doing my math homework and, oh, now I really, really, really want to go and respond to that email from my teacher. That skill of being able to resist that and say, nope, that's not my goal right now. My goal right now is to do my math. We had a really, really cute moment in the homework center last night that a student was checking out with their coach and their dad came and he saw that his dad was here. and he wanted to show him his grades, and he's like, Dad, come over, and the coach is like, we're gonna finish your checkout, we're gonna finish your checkout. So when you're thinking about behavior, it's not always the bad stuff, it's not always the bad behavior. Like, he was really proud, that's great, we want our kids to be proud of their grades, he really wanted to show it. But in that moment, we wanted him to practice a little bit of inhibition, a little bit of that self-restraint to wait, check out first, and then share with your dad. And it's the belief that our kids have that then I'll be able to do that enjoyable thing. They don't trust that yet. They don't trust that I'm going to be able to watch YouTube later, or that I can check that notification from my friend later. Later doesn't exist to them, it's only now. And so the idea of having him refocus on the checkout, I might forget to tell my dad about my grades. I might not get to show him, they might close the computer down, I might not do it, so I want to act on that impulse. So it's a good thing in that case. But another one that I wanted to just highlight today was the shifting, because shifting is also known as flexible thinking. So shifting is our mind's ability to shift our thoughts, see different perspectives, handle changes in our routine, handle surprises in our routine, being able to shift our focus. So that can happen. And some of our kids lie to themselves and think I'm a really, really good shifter. I can multitask. I can check my phone and work on my math homework. I can do it 1,000 times. Yes, you physically are acting on that behavior of like looking down and going back to your math, but you're losing lots and lots of time by trying to lie to yourself and saying you can multitask. Right? And then I have to give them credit here. They're really, really good at shifting from tab to tab on really fast. I'm a technology specialist. I don't even know all the keystroke to switch from tab to tab as fast as they do. But that, again, is interfering with their goal of getting their homework done or getting that assignment done or even getting that email done if they have a bunch of tabs and they're switching back and forth. That's too much cognitive shifting that's going on right there. And so the other example, that like flexible thinking, does anybody have any students that really like things a certain way? Or if you ever once said, I see like a raised hand in the back, you ever said, hey, we're going to check out this place in McLean called the Study Pro, and they work on study skills or executive function, and you just surprised them when you were picking them up from school, how would that conversation go? Does that ever happen? We had a student who came the other day, it was his first time coming, and he goes, I thought I was going to have to get weighed in. I thought it was like a doctor. And then he saw the basketball hoop and he was fine. Okay, this isn't so bad. But that's exactly, we're asking kids to be flexible in their thinking all the time because of our busy schedules, right? And so why we wanted to highlight some of these in, because those of you who have been here before, you've seen this slide. It's important to highlight what some of those might look like when we're thinking about behavior. Because some of these challenges with executive function, the part of the brain that's still developing, can look like bad behavior. I put that in quotes. But it can look like a lack of motivation. It can look like I'm trying to distract myself with having multiple tabs open. But we have to help them because they're still developing that strength and that skill. So remember, it's either a strength that I might have at this time, or it might be an area that I might need some strategies on. And so this, you've seen this graphic here before, if you've been here as well, but this is just showing that maturation of the brain. And researchers started to say, you know, why are human babies like so helpless when they're born? Like, why? Why are they so dependent on their parents? And it really is, you know, one researcher described it as a luxury that we have this long to develop our brains. It's luxury. And I was like, okay, tell that to the 6th grader who's freaking out about their test tomorrow, that this is luxury. Oh, it's okay, your brain's developing, you don't need to learn, it's part of the process, you gotta struggle through it now. It doesn't get received very well, I'll tell you that. But we have this slow progression of maturation of our brain, and the last part is that frontal lobe. It is that ability to use those executive functions to not think about the now, to think about the future. So they're in the now, so if I think, I have a sensation, I'm thirsty, I can pick up this bottle of water, I can take a sip. The future might be, oh, I'm not thirsty right now, but I better drink that because I had a coffee, and if I don't drink enough water, then I'm gonna get a migraine later in the day, and then I won't be able to sleep. There's all those future planning. So they're in the now. They can act on a thought or an impulse that might be happening now, but it's our job to kind of help them think a little bit further into that future.
So, as Lindsay said, the big change for our kids versus where we were is that very often, if not always, the curriculums at school outpace or outstrip the executive function development of our students. So if you think about, did you take Spanish in kindergarten when you were in school? Do we give research papers that are 5 and 6 pages long to second graders? No, we don't. Why? Because they would outstrip their executive functioning capabilities. We know that those kids can't go off and read the directions and go research and put things in categories and then make sure that all of their thoughts flow forward. But the same things are happening often for our kids. They're getting the moral equivalent of the research paper when they're not necessarily ready. That doesn't make them bad. It doesn't make even necessarily the schools bad or anything bad. It's just that's really what we're struggling with, is that little bit of a gap. And so what we see, and we won't spend any time on this really, is that when we did a very in-depth meeting amongst all of our coaches, our executive function coaches, these are the biggest challenges we're seeing. You know, how to get kids started. Why do they not get started? Because sometimes you get so overwhelmed. Do you ever not get started in a task because it just seems like a non-preferred task, right? A lot of things are not they not get started because sometimes you get so overwhelmed. Do you ever not get started in a task because it just seems like a non-preferred task, right? A lot of things are non-preferred for kids when things seem a little bit overwhelming, that moral equivalent of the research paper. So these are the types of challenges that we see most often.
And so how we can help and how parents can help is just thinking about moving over to, this is just an example of like how executive function coaching is a little bit different than content tutoring. So we are not opposed to content tutoring. It's really important for some of our students to have remediation if there's gaps in content knowledge and they need extra practice on that specific skill or that specific topic. The content tutoring is really beneficial and effective. Now, there's a difference between the actual content versus the process, as Debbie was saying. So the process is the how we're going to learn. So you might have the content information, but how are you going to study a test? How are you going to apply what you know on that test? What strategies might you need to actually, same student from last night, every test, A, failing some of the classes because no work was being turned in. So that's more of the process. He needed strategies for how am I going to get my homework done and turned in so that I can show that I know what I know. To actually show that I have learned this, you have to have some of these strategies for the process piece. And so if we think about, everyone in this room might have a actual results-based goal. Like, I want my student to not have any missing work, or I want my student to pass that test, or I want my student to have confidence in themselves. These are some examples of how process goals are a little bit different than the results goals. Like, the results are no missing work. We want absolutely no missing work. That's a good goal, but how do we get there? So here are some examples about, you might need a self-advocacy component of that. I don't know what my missing work is. So the strategy is, let's set up a meeting with your teacher to find out exactly what might be missing. And we use self-advocacy a lot with our kids, and they really need the structure to know what that is. There's a lot of executive functions you need to be a self-advocate. Right? The other one, initiation. Right? You might need to use a checklist. With the minute you get a rubric, that you're highlighting the important information. And a rubric can be overwhelming. How can we key in on the important information, turn it into a checklist, because that can help start with initiation. The planning, this is one that we use a lot, is I just need a reminder to plan. The planners aren't being used in school. There's just not a time. The bell rings, we got to go home. But you can set an alarm on your phone that you're going to start tonight at 5 o'clock. So the alarm goes off on your phone. I know to put my phone away, and I go check Google Classroom. So that's the process, the strategies they need. And then that last one, the materials organization. We're a big fan of Scannable. For a student who has trouble missing work, Scannable, just an app right on their phone. Take a picture of it, submit it right to Google Classroom. It actually links right with Google Classroom or with email. And you can submit the work right away or store it in Google Drive. But it just removes that barrier of losing it between the time I finished it, so it's got to get into the right folder, into the backpack, and then it might get crumbled at the bottom of the backpack, and then it's got to get taken back out and then actually turned in and submitted to the teacher. There's a lot of moving parts in that. So this strategy can help eliminate some of those barriers.
So to kind of bring the whole thing home, before you ask to bring the whole thing home, what we really wanted to communicate before Katherine comes up is that, you know, there are processes we really want to help everybody here become coaches and really help them kids name, some of the challenges. Flexibility, wow, I really saw you being flexible. Boy, I love how you're planning, right? That's really nice that you're self-advocating. So let's not make it a mystery. Know that sometimes if things aren't happening, there is a skill missing. And, we just encourage you to really look at that. We call that very much a growth mindset. They may not be there yet. And so we hope that you, have a little bit of a better understanding of what executive function is and how you may be able to help at home. We hope that next month we'll be able to have a lunch and learn. It is April 16th. We'll see where we are. We have a fantastic speaker, like today, of course, who's a psychologist at Fairfax County Public Schools. And I've seen this presentation, and I ran up to him afterwards and said, all of the families of the study program need to have more effective parent-child communication. And I was so impressed with what he did, so I hope you can make that. And then we have a couple other 3 growth mindset workshops for 4th and 5th graders. They're all on the website and programs, and active study strategies for 6th to 8th graders in the end of March. And we do have our summer schedule up, which may not be up there, but we do have our summer schedule up. Again, all of this is under if you drop down the programs tab. So with that, thank you for that attention. We are excited to get to our speaker. So Katherine Lewis, we do have some books over here to sign afterwards if you guys would like to have them signed, and we're going to raffle off a few at the end. Of course, Katherine is world-renowned. She used to be a reporter and a journalist. And award-winning as well. Obviously, she has a varied background in BA physics at Harvard. And most importantly, she's a positive parenting coach with PEP, and I'm sure she'll show PEP, but I know it's a positive parenting coach, and so she obviously has a breadth of experience, and we'd like to welcome her to Study Boat. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Debbie and Lindsay, and to all of you for being out on this beautiful day when there's a lot of uncertainty going on in our region and in our world. And as Debbie said, I really hope we can just take this hour to be together, to share some ideas about Kids Hour, to be together, to share some ideas about kids, what's going on with kids today, and what we can do that might help. So as Debbie said, I'm a journalist, certified parent educator, and author of this book, The Good News About Bad Behavior. So I spent 5 years traveling the country, following research scientists, educators, parents, families. My kids say I stalked kids because I would just sort of follow them around in school or at home to see what was going on and wait till something interesting happened. And something always did happen because they were children. So I got to observe a lot of different kinds of behavior and pulled out some really helpful findings for teachers and for parents. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the process of my book, how I got into it, sort of different questions that I pursued during my research, and then end with really practical takeaways that my goal is you'll walk out this door and go home and immediately be able to start using. And we'll have time for Q&A at the end. One of my favorite things is to troubleshoot parenting questions. So please jot them down, save them up, and we'll talk very specifically. So just to get a show of hands, I'd love to see who in the room is a parent of a school-age child right now. Okay, and who is sort of in another role, teacher, coach, therapist, school counselor, other. Okay, any grandparents in the room? Okay, awesome. And what age are your children? Sort of, are we coming early elementary, under 7? Okay, what about the sort of key, like 9 through 12 years? Okay, who here has teens, 13, 18? Okay, and who has successfully launched, a 19-year-old or older? Okay, so some of you, especially in those older groups, may be thinking,
Can I do this?
maybe thinking, is it too late, right? But I'm here with a 16-year-old who still hasn't got their stuff together. Like, am I just learning some of these strategies too late? And I'll tell you about when I was on book tour, I was on a radio talk show, and a mom called in with that same question. She said, is it too late for my daughter? She's living in our basement, unemployed, she's 36. So I say to you the same thing I said to her, it is never too late. It's never too late to learn some new tools that might help with your relationship with your child, that might help your child to manage themselves. And looking forward to sharing them with you today. So in addition to being a certified parent educator and an author and journalist, I came to this question of kids' behavior very personally because I'm also the mom of 3 kids, each of whom caused me to ask the same question, which was the first question I went into this research with. Why don't they just do what you want? Right? So this is one of my kids who I will not name to protect the extremely guilty. And you can see from this picture, this was the kind of response I got a lot. And I think the question I asked before I took this picture was, hey, hon, could you smile for the camera? And I got the no. So when I became a mom, I really hadn't had a lot of exposure to kids. I had been a journalist working in Washington, D.C. I interacted with other adults. They might sometimes behave like children, but they were technically adults without really developed prefrontal lobe. So I heard about the terrible twos, right? I expected that to be tough. I even knew there was this 3-nature stage at 3 where they get a little sassy and sort of the preview for what they'll be like as a teen. But by 4 and 5, I was thinking, when does it click, right? When do they just start cooperating? When do they just do what you want? An experience I had in those early years really crystallized for me the struggle I was having as a mom dealing with my kids. My baby had just started kindergarten, right? And we were all so excited. He was at the big kids school, you know, finally get to school, and I wanted to have that good school-home connection, right? I wanted to support the work they were doing and be present at the school, so I volunteered for playground recess duty. I showed up at the school and I was assigned on the blacktop, you know, beautiful sunny day, sort of like this, in just across the river in Maryland. And I was watching my perfect little kindergartner, right? The chubby cheeks, the little legs, playing with all these new kindergarten friends. And nearby were some 4th and 5th grade boys playing on the blacktop. And I used the term playing loosely because there was no organized game going on, right? They each had a ball or 2 balls, a kickball, a basketball. They were whipping them across the blacktop, kind of coming pretty close to where the kindergartners were playing. So I figured this is why I was here, right? This is my adult role to keep everyone safe. So I waved over, said, boys, could you please be more careful with the ball so you don't hit the kindergartners? Anyone like to guess what they said? Did they say, thank you so much, Mrs. Lewis, for letting us know? No, they did not. So I figured they didn't hear me, right? Walked a little closer, made direct eye contact, use my big girl voice. Boys, put down the balls so you don't hit the kindergartners. And to my surprise, again, they looked right through me. It was a ghost. So this may not surprise any of you here in this room. It doesn't surprise me now, knowing what I know, but at the time, I was thinking back to my own childhood, right? In a very similar suburban elementary school, 99% of the kids that I grew up with at least would have pretended to cooperate with the adult giving them a direct instruction. And this is when I really started to wonder, not just why don't kids do what you want, but is there something different about kids today? Is there something different about the way that they respond to a direct instruction, about the way that they interact with us, adults, or even about the way that they manage themselves that might be helpful to know in this kind of situation? And through those early elementary years, I was around many more kids than I had been before. I was a Girl Scout leader. I coached my kids' Odyssey for my team. I volunteered in the classroom. And in all these settings, I saw kids who were just a little bit more rambunctious. They had trouble sitting still. They had trouble keeping hands to themselves. They needed a lot of support from me. You know, there would be the kid who was checking the clock every 10 minutes and asking, when is my mom coming to pick me up? And he's going to say, well, he has anxiety. That's why he's really nervous about that. And another child who, you know, their dad would say, hey, it really helps if you just put a hand on his shoulder to get their attention, because she has ADHD. And that's when I started to wonder if there was some way to document if there was an answer to this question. Is there something different about kids today? And my journalist brain got curious. I started combing the research. I did a huge literature search, right? I looked at all the research I could get my hands on about kids' behavior and mental health, behavioral health. And I concluded that yes, there is something different about kids today. And the most compelling study I'll share with you is from the National Institutes of Mental Health, representative sample of more than 10,000 children across the country. And they found that 1 in 2 kids will have a mood or behavioral disorder by 18. So this really blew me away. This means 1 in 2 kids in my child's kindergarten class, by the time they graduate from high school, is going to be managing something pretty significant when it comes to their thoughts, behavior, or emotions. And to me, this is nothing less than a crisis of self-regulation. This means that we really are no longer talking about 1 or 2 kids who have ADHD or depression who need help, right? It's a lot of us, right? A lot of our children, a lot of us as adults as well, who need more support than getting in managing our mood, our thoughts, or behavior. And so sometimes the point, maybe not in this setting, because I think this work is so aligned with the study prep, but in some schools where I talk, people are like, lady, I just came here to figure out how to make mornings smoother. Like, why are we talking about disorders? And the reason is that children's behavior is on a continuum, right? At the far end of a continuum, your intrusive thoughts, your worries, your fears interfere with your activities of daily living to the extent that you are diagnosed with anxiety, right? But all along that continuum, we all have worries and fears, and sometimes they do get in the way of what we're trying to do. And when we as adults get curious, we can sometimes uncover the reasons for our kids' behavior and find that the strategies that work for kids with that diagnosis, right, also work for our kids. And a very simple example I'll give is the child who is so excited to be on the summer swim team, right? Signs up for summer swim, really excited to get the uniform, and go to practices with the big kids, and then the time comes to go to meet, and there's a total meltdown lying on the floor, screaming and kicking, and you're thinking, I did not ask to sign you up for this, why are you getting so upset? And you may find if you start getting curious and probing, that underlying that meltdown is some fear or worry about, what is it going to be like? Are people going to be looking at me? And once you can address that fear, it helps the child resolve the issue. It may not be a fear, right? It may be just, this is a kid who has trouble with transition. Whatever they were doing before you said it's time to go was like so compelling that they couldn't break away, but as soon as they're in their car on the way to the meet, they're fine. They forgot all about the meltdown. The key is for us to stop worrying so much about the behavior and start trying to understand the underlying reasons for the behavior. I think it's helpful to look a little bit deeper into this study just for a minute to look at the breakdown and see that really anxiety is the biggest challenge that our kids are dealing with. Nearly a third of kids will have anxiety according to the study. And the other numbers I've seen are all really centered around that. 19% will have a behavioral issue like ADD or oppositional defiant disorder. 14% are dealing with a mood disorder. 11% have a substance use disorder. And for those math nerds in the room, like 1 in 2 would be 50%, right? These add up to more than 50% because often these come together, right? If you have ADHD and you're kind of always getting caught unprepared, you may also have anxiety, right? Some of we experience as comorbidity, but those shouldn't say. So, but I think it's helpful to just understand that anxiety often shows up first in our kids, and it's often the biggest issue. So it's a good thing to have some strategies for it, just in case it's useful for our kids. So when I share this data, sometimes people are not convinced, and I certainly was skeptical at first. And I said, how do we know this is real? Right? How do we know that we're not just really quick to slap a label on kids and want to diagnose us with something? How do we know there's a difference now than 20, 30, 40 years ago when we were growing up and it was sort of more rare to think about these diagnoses? Or even, what if it is real and these things were present then, but we just weren't as aware of it, doctors and parents weren't as likely to try to get a diagnosis. And I'll just share the statistics that convince me that this is a real problem that we have to address, and that is the youth suicide rates, which I'm guessing you've heard about. One of the data just, when I first had this slide, it wasn't nearly as chilling, but in the last decade, for our little kids, 10 to 14 years old, the suicide rate had nearly tripled. And for our 15 to 19-year-old kids, it has gone up 76%. And as one of the researchers I followed for this book said, you can't overdiagnose deadlines. So I'm not sharing this to scare you, but just to make the case, this is something we need to take seriously, and even to normalize that, like, we're all dealing with something. Right? Every other child, every other adult, young adult certainly, is managing something with regard to their behavior, thoughts, or emotions. And so we all need to look for strategies to be more comfortable sharing strategies, sharing challenges, and looking for the ways that we can really help. So when you think about what are those tools, what are the things that we do to help when our kids are managing, you know, when I was a new parent, the tools that I instinctively turned to when I was faced with a child who wasn't doing what I wanted were what my parents used with me, right? Right? I pay you for grades. I was paid for grades. You can get extra screen time if you do that, or the punishment, right? If you don't do this, you can't go out Saturday. And those are really, really common. It's what most of us use. And unfortunately, as I dug into the research, I found increasingly these are not effective in addressing the real issue, which, as Debbie and Lindsay both said, is a skill issue, right? It's that our kids don't have those skills to manage their thoughts, behavior, and emotions. It's not about them wanting to get better grades or wanting to get along with their parents. It's the skill that they don't have. So you have to throw these out the window, I'm sorry to say. And there's really compelling research that punishment is really not effective because it damages the relationship with our child, right? Which is the foundation for self-regulation. And it even can really jeopardize their mental health in some situations for kids who are particularly vulnerable. Even rewards, counterintuitively, they disincentivize the behavior we're trying to encourage. In a very simple experiment that was done in California, they gave people a yogurt drink to try that they had never tried before. And one group of people was offered payment if they tried the drink, and one group of people was just offered the drink. The people who were paid to try it rated it as less enjoyable than the people who were just given the choice to try it. So when we give an incentive, we're sending a message, you really don't want to do this anyway, so I'm going to have to make it worth your while. And it holds true for like vegetables that we want our kids to eat, and so we offer them dessert or mental shift, and we'll certainly come back to it in the Q&A. So as I was going through my research and looking at what actually does work, since we can no longer use the rewards or the punishment, I visited dozens of schools. I spent hundreds of hours in classrooms. I ended up writing about 4 different models for teaching kids to self-regulate, 2 in homes and 2 in schools. And rather than sort of endorsing one and saying you must do exactly this, I tried to pull out what are the common elements that really help in teaching kids to self-regulate. So this is the central question, the third question that I came to after starting with wanting them to do what I want, and then wondering if there was something different about kids today. This has ended up being the central question of my book. What really helps for kids to self-regulate, that gives them the ability to manage their thoughts, behavior, and emotions? And in all my research and the models that I looked at, I found there's 3 common elements in every model for teaching self-regulation that are really important for us to know about. Those are connection, communication, and capability building. And a lot of this you're already doing. I know that you're committed parents and grandparents and teachers. You're here because you're interested in learning more and you're committed to your role. And so I'm sure you're doing a lot of these things already. And it's just interesting to me that a lot of the things that intuitively come to us are also really being supported by what's happening now at the frontier of neuroscience. And I'll just share a little bit about the research that I looked at because there's too much, but a couple studies that really make the case that we're starting with connection. There's a study out of University of Pittsburgh by a doctor named Greg Siegel. And he's a neuroscientist looking at kids who have anxiety. So when you have anxiety, it's sort of like your threshold for triggering that fight or flight response is a little lower. So the things that would not necessarily get someone else scared you. And you can actually see it when you look at someone's brain in an MRI scan because their amygdala, the part of the brain that regulates that fight or flight response, it lights up. So has anyone here had an MRI? A super pleasant experience? Right? So it's not the most fun, and it's sort of this big semicircle of plastic. You've got a screen right against your face, a little claustrophobic. So Dr. Siegel was giving MRI scans to a group of children with anxiety. Some of these kids were not thrilled about the experience, so they asked, could we have our mom or dad stand right next to us? Some of the kids didn't ask. And usually in a medical MRI, they'll let a parent be in the room for a child scan. So the scientists let them do it, and they thought nothing of it, until they began to crunch the data. And one of Dr. Siegel's graduate students said, wait a minute, have we introduced a variable here that's going to skew our results by having a parent in the room sometimes and not in the room other times? So they decided, yeah, we might need to look at that variable. And they pulled out the brain scans of just the kids who had their parents standing right next to them. And they found something really surprising and unexpected. Their brains looked identical to kids without anxiety. There was something about the parent being right next to them that was keeping their brain in a regulated state, even though they were in this unfamiliar environment where typically they would have seen a spike in that amygdala activity. So this brings us to the first tool in the realm of connection that I think is really helpful for us to know about, is our presence. Just our calm presence with our children can help them to self-regulate. It can help them keep their thoughts, behavior, and emotions under control, and sometimes it can even bring them back if they're starting to spiral. This is obviously not a cure-all for every meltdown, but it's just one of those tools that we can think about possibly in a different way. So this is not a guilt trip for sending kids off to school and separating from them, because we cannot follow our children all through their life. And it's actually really healthy for kids to separate from their parent and then be reunited. So they separate, get a little nervous, the amygdala lights up, and then they calm back down. They're with a teacher or caregiver they're safe with, and that's almost like a workout for the brain. But it's just a reminder that this can be very powerful. The other study I want to mention is from Jim Cohen at the University of Virginia, and he was doing a study of women and typically developing women, and he put them into an MRI scan again to see how their brains reacted when they were told you might get a small shock in your foot. So imagine you're lying there in an MRI machine, you're waiting, right? Am I going to get shocked? You might expect their amygdala lit up, right? So the women were lying there, their amygdala lit up. It was a signal that they were in that fight or flight mode. A small subgroup of women were actually allowed to hold their spouse's hand. And they saw dramatically lower levels of that amygdala activity. Holding their spouse's hand, having that physical support from a loved one, was keeping them in a regulated brain state. A third group of women held a stranger's hand. And even a stranger giving that physical support gave them somewhat of a boost in their ability to self-regulate, and they showed a sort of middle level of amygdala activity. This is the second tool that's really helpful for us with our kids. Physical touch, right? You never know. In the middle of a screaming fit, my teenager once was just so mad at me, yelling, "You're the worst mom, nobody else does this." And I just looked and said, "Do you want a hug?" And I was so surprised. She just melted and said yes, and I gave a big hug, and that was part of the calming down process. So it's not going to work every time, right? But you never know. It may work in unexpected ways. It could be a hand on the knee, a hand on the shoulders. A physical touch can be another really useful tool for us to help our kids learn to self-regulate and get back into a regulated state. There's two others in the realm of connection I'll just mention that are really powerful. There's a huge body of research, neuroscience and also behavioral science, that when we feel excluded, when we feel ostracized or not accepted by the group, it's experienced in our brains like pain, like physical pain. That's how big our social drive is as human beings. We want to be accepted and understood and okay with other people. So empathy, just giving our kids empathy. Yeah, it really sounds like your teacher was unfair. That must feel wrong, right? That can help them to calm back down. And modeling, right? We're teaching our kids all the time, how do we respond to stress? How do we deal with setbacks, right? If I'm running late for something, I'm at the wheel and my child is right there, am I self-blaming? I should have left earlier, I can't believe I was so stupid, why did I let letting myself get distracted, right? Or am I showing a more healthy, adaptive response to stress? I'm starting to feel stressed out. I feel my heart rate racing, but I'm going to take a deep breath. And I'm going to remember that it's okay if I'm a little bit late. I'll compensate for it. And next time I'll leave early. So those are two very different responses to the same scenario. And they're teaching our child different things about how do we handle all of those unexpected curveballs that life throws our way. So one of the most vivid ways I found out about connection was when I asked a team of Columbia University neuroscientists to judge my parenting. So yeah, not everyone would do this, but I really wanted to get into some of those neuroscience experiments and understand what they're learning about the connection between parents and kids. So this is me and my daughter Ava, and you can see it, hopefully in the back, you can see that we're hooked up with EKG leads, and the researchers are measuring our heart rates, our breathing. They even take a saliva sample to measure the level of cortisol in our saliva, which is a rough proxy for stress. And they're finding really interesting things about the connection between parent and child, the way that kids learn about emotions. So after just a couple minutes sitting together in this room, not even talking, just reading magazines side by side, our heart rate starts to synchronize. Our breathing starts to synchronize. So there's all this connection between us that's on the physiological level. And again, I think the implications for us are really powerful. So if you had a screaming, tantruming, defiant, slamming door kid, right? Their heart rate is high. Their breathing is fast. Their voice is loud. It's really natural for us to feel that in our bodies. Our heart rate probably will speed up, right? Our breathing may get faster. We want to yell back, right? And if we do, then we can get into this vicious cycle where both of us are dysregulated. Nobody is in that prefrontal cortex where they're managing executive function, right? Where they're dealing with impulse control and problem solving, all those things we want our kids to do to make good choices, right? We're both in that amygdala, just reactive. So it's really important for us to know if we can find that moment of zen, right? Just take a deep breath, bring ourselves under control. It may not be magic to snap them out of it, but at least we're not making it worse. So you're all here today. I'm sure there's lots of ways you're already connecting with your kids. I would love to hear some examples, ways that you are connecting with your children now. And you can model courage for the group by doing this first. Yeah.
This is something my parents did with me, and something I do with my kids is we've always had a little silent message with 3 quick squeezes in the hand with short for I love you.
Aww.
And sometimes when they're super upset, or my kids are 5 and 8, so when my 5-year-old has a temper tantrum, 3 quick squeezes on the hand gets through lightning fast. It's amazing because sometimes he's so worked up, he's breathing, he can't talk, but those 3 quick squeezes is so grounding. And that's one of the things, it's one of our family things. My parents know it, we all do it, and he knows that he'll just reach back and do 3 squeezes back. And when he's not able to talk, not able to verbalize, that's
Oh, I love that. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. That's wonderful. And it brings in that physical touch. Other examples? Yes.
I'll do for transition times when you're anxiety. I have 8 and almost 12-year-old. My 12-year-old is ADD, anxiety, other letters. But I'll scratch their backs sometimes when we're reading a story, or kind of just, I'll lay down with them before bed. And then in the morning, it's like with my son, like he hard to get up, hard to face the day, stressed about everything. And the thing about the touch with kids who are kind of anxiety or ADD is sometimes they crave it and want it, but other times it's too much. He's got, the sensory seeking, sensory avoidance both. But just for some reason, because the back scratching feels so good, that calms someone, calms me down and distracts me from my mental flip-outs, and so that's a good control. And in the car, the squeezing, one thing I'll do is in a car where you can be distracted with someone and you can't really have, eye contact.
Right.
A lot of times when I know they're upset in the car, I'll just put a hand back and get it, and they'll grab my hand, even when we're like not getting along, like that's the thing. But we started when they were young.
Yeah.
We start that stuff when they're young. It's instinctual even, so even though they're mad at me in the car, they just grab the hand. It's almost like that point, and then you have the connection, and then they bring it down.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, I love that. Thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
I think it's nice to establish traditions that are unique to one family. In my family, my kids are a bit older. We had a gross out picnic every summer where we would throw mud pies, yellow, green, and really get all those impulses out. And we closed down afterwards. We also had a formal back-to-school tea to mourn the passing of summer holy tea. It had all the fine dine-ins and sandwiches with the first stuff.
Oh, I love that. What a great tradition. Okay.
Oh, we also had Sister's Day and Brother's Day. It's called the day of.
Oh, that's very sweet. Okay, so you guys took a lot of my answers. Family traditions are wonderful. Games, inside jokes, special signals, cuddles, at bedtime or any other time. So I want to mention this weekly special time and family meetings. This is something the Parent Encouragement Program teaches, and they're both really, really powerful connection tools. So special time is one adult, one child. So no siblings, no other parent. You are 100% at their disposal. You're doing an activity that they choose. Yes, even if it's Candyland for the millionth time. It can be for our little guys, 10 or 15 minutes. It fills their bucket with that connection that they need, and it is sacred. So even if you are, in a fight or they just did something wrong, you still honor special times on the calendar. We're going to do special times, so it doesn't get taken away as a punishment. It's honored like all the other commitments we have that we take so seriously. We don't pick up our phone. We don't get distracted by other commitments. And it's a wonderful way to build that relationship. And I sometimes share this with people, they're like, I'm with my child every second. How do they need more time, right? It's not more time, it's special time. So it's not about quantity, it's about making it special, naming it, putting on the calendar, and having something to look forward to. So it can be also a good placeholder when your kid is demanding your attention, you're like, wants to do something. Oh, that's such a great idea, let's do that. Put it on the list for special time. We'll do that at 4, we'll do that on Saturday, whenever your special time is. So think about special time if you haven't done it before. Family meetings are amazing connection tools, so many other things that they bring to your family, and they work like this. So you start with appreciations. Every person in the family appreciates something specific that every other person did. So I will say I really appreciated that Jamie took Ava to his school to show her around and to help her feel ready before she started middle school, and that was a really kind and helpful thing to do that gave her more comfort. I'll thank my husband or other kids. And the kids will start this too. If you start a family meeting, the first couple of meetings will sound like, I really appreciate Samantha for not being so annoying this week. And they will be backhanded compliments, or they'll say, I can't think of anything. But the more you do it, they start to realize how amazing it feels to be appreciated for something that you did, that you didn't have to, that benefited the family or another person in the family. It builds this culture of gratitude in the family, and then all of us start to look out and notice the things that we do for each other. It's a really wonderful family building strategy. Next step is whole business. So all the things we talked about last week, we bring up again. How are they working? Are our screen time rules working well? Is the homework time, handled the way we want it to be? Are people going to bed on time? Whatever it was that was on your agenda last week, you assess it and you make changes if you need to. The third step is new business. This is where we negotiate all our family agreements, our family rules, we hash out the problems, and we come to an agreement. And there will always be more new business that we can handle, but we'll get to it, right? So you list it, and if you can't get to it in this family meeting, you'll handle it at the next family meeting. When you first introduce family meetings, let the kids pick the new business, right? Let them get their problems addressed first, and they will come to future family meetings, right? Don't start with your agenda. And the final stop is allowance. Because we want our kids to learn to manage money. Yes, they will be buying junky stuff from the dollar store, right? For the first month or 2 months or 4 months, depending on how long it takes your kid to learn. But eventually they realize, oh, maybe I should save my allowance so I can buy that XYZ Xbox game that I really want, or get my friend a gift for their birthday. It's a really great closure to the meeting. Everyone in the meeting has a role. We have a chairperson, a secretary taking notes. We have a timekeeper, a snack helper. However many people you have in your family, you have many roles, and they rotate. So even our little kids who can't necessarily write yet, they will be telling the adult what to write as the secretary. Cuddles and roughhousing are a really great way to connect with kids. Roughhousing kind of activates that same amygdala sort of fight or flight response, but they're with someone they trust and love, so they're safe. So it's another great way to kind of get practice feeling that anxiety or that fear in a safe way. It gives our kids a little bit of tolerance for it. Games, inside jokes, family traditions, wonderful ones that we've heard here. And the last one is one of my golden nuggets that you can take and use right away, which is to connect before you correct a child. And the way this looks like is you walk into a room, possibly you see your child on an iPad, and it's not iPad time, right? I don't know about you, my first response would always be, what are you doing? It's not iPaded, they push back, they're defensive, they're denying, you didn't tell me, blah, 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 and nothing productive happens, right? He's doing that crazy stuff again, right? You love him, and it's homework time. That at least I have a chance of them being like, oh, yeah, okay, and going on to homework, getting some cooperation. It does not mean it was okay that they were on the iPad at the wrong time. It doesn't mean they escaped the consequence of that, but it doesn't have to happen first, right? I can connect first and then remind them of what they're supposed to be doing, tell them the consequence, and move on in a smooth way through our day. So when we're doing all this connection, especially with our little guys, eye contact, being at their level is really, really helpful because that gives also those physical cues that we're connected with them. So at this study in Colombia, they also put kids into an MRI machine to see how they're learning from their parents about emotions and whether they can learn better from their parent than from a stranger, from all the facial cues and the way that we speak to our kids. And this brings us to the second pillar in all of the discipline models, the self-regulation models that I looked at, which is communication. How are we telling our kids or communicating with them through the day? And I'm not talking here about talking. So we talk a lot to our kids, right? We talk a lot at them. But the ways that we communicate that can help build their self-regulation. So the communication strategies that can help them get more control over their thoughts, behavior, and emotions. I learned about this really powerfully when I went to Vermont and I met the Jackson family. So I hope it's not too bright here that you can see here. Mae Jackson is a mom and she's holding her 4-year-old Magnolia on her lap, and Magnolia's face is just crumpled. She's crying. Her twin sister Scarlett's leaning over to see what's happening. And Magnolia is just distraught because her older brother has just left the house to go play soccer, and she really wanted to go with him, but it's November in Vermont, she has a cold, and her parents had said, no, you can't go, not today. What struck me when I saw this scene was all the things that Mae Jackson was not saying to her daughter. Many of the things that I have said to my kids, that would have been my warning, you couldn't go to the soccer game, why are you getting so worked up? She's just holding her, giving her empathy. I know you're so upset, and giving her that physical contact. So I realized when I saw this, she was communicating something really, really important to her. Your strong emotions are okay with me. I'm not going to melt because you're having a meltdown. You don't have to shove those feelings down or hide them or, deny them. It's okay. I can take it. This is a really, really important message for our kids to feel that we can be okay with them being uncomfortable, right? Whether it's upset about something like this or a grade or a friendship issues, when we join them in their chaotic grade, right? Oh my gosh, you're not invited to the party? How could she do that to you, right? Then we give them the message, this really is a crisis. Even my mom's worried about my social life, right? And instead if we can calm ourselves, right? And just let them know, even non-verbally, we can handle this. It's going to be okay. That's a really, really important message for our kids. So other ways that we can communicate in ways that build their self-regulation, encouragement, and positive language. This is like so much of what I learned from the parent encouragement program. And Encouragement is a very specific thing at public papers. There was no slamming of books. That's what I call persistence, or that's what I call self-control. So you're naming it, you're helping them to see themselves in a different way. Positive language can be as simple as turning a negative into a positive with some language tricks. So, right, just flipping it from a negative to a positive, especially with our kids who are oppositional, can be really, really encouraging and keeps them from going right into that power struggle. Giving kids information, right? Sometimes we assume that our kids know what's happening next, how to do something, the consequences of their action, and so we get frustrated if they're not behaving in a certain way, but just giving them information about the day or about the impact of their actions without having a judgment around it or emotion about it can help them to act on that information without getting dysregulated. Asking kids questions. So when we get asked a question, it triggers our prefrontal cortex, that critical thinking, problem-solving part of our brain. It keeps our kids in that brain when they are having to deal with a question, as opposed to being given a direct instruction. So, the milk spill, what can we do to clean it up, right? We'll be more likely to keep them self-regulated and elicit cooperation than, can't believe you spilled the milk. Go get a towel to wipe it off. Another really simple language shift that can be really powerful. Planning and thinking ahead. This is a life study pro, right? All the things we're learning here that help our kids build their executive function. What are you going to need in school for that project, right? What are you going to need at soccer practice? How can you help yourself remember the water bottle, the soccer ball, the cleats, everything you're going to need? Help them to anticipate things. And then the flip side of that is reflecting on what they did wrong, right? Oh, you left your sweatshirt at school again. Okay, so what do you think happened? How can you avoid it in the future, right? Processing the day, helping them understand their mistakes and prepare them and do better in the future. Such an important role that we parents can play for them. And the last one here, notes and signs, I love because, I don't know about you, I have kids who do not take well to direct reprimand, but if I leave a little note, they can be much more flexible and accommodating. And we saw this when we were working with Ava on not dropping the backpack right in the center of the front hall when she walked in after school, right? So we had talked about it at the family meeting, made all these agreements, didn't work. My husband even built a little cabinet with her with hooks for everyone's backpack so she could hang it up. It worked for a little bit and then she forgot. So I walked in again one day and there it was in the middle of the floor where I nearly tripped. I was about to go talk to her about it when I saw a stack of Post-it notes nearby. And I grabbed a Post-it note and wrote on it, "Dear Ava, I don't like lying down on the floor. Please hang me up. Love, your backpack." Put it on the backpack, went about my day. And 15 minutes later, she came running into the kitchen with the note saying, "Mommy, backpacks can't write." She thought it was so funny, right? It tickled her funny bone and it got her attention. So she hung up the backpack. And so, yes, there were a few notes from the backpack. It wasn't like once and then it solved the problem, but it gave me a new tool that reminded her without having to directly get in her face and trigger that defensive response. If you saw my house, it's covered with signs, right? We have our morning routine, we have our bedtime routine, we have our screen rules. Everything is signs around the walls, just like a classroom, right? So when they're not following the screen rules, I'll just say, screen rules, right? Point to the sign, little creepy mom, right? But it reminds them without getting right into their face. So this is a lot of work, right? Thinking about how we communicate, connecting with our kids. We're all obviously already spending a lot of time and resources on your kids, right? I understand this is a lot, but the payoff is in the third element that was in every model of discipline that I looked at, which is capability building. So this is where we see our kids grow in their life skills and their social and emotional skills. And again, I'll take you back to the Jackson family, which may be the most capable of the hundreds of families that I interviewed for this book. The 4-year-old twins are packing their own lunch for preschool. They help fold laundry. They help with the dishes. They even help with the pets. The 7-year-old Zealand, who you see here independently doing his homework in the background, He is lighting the fire that heats the house. He helps with all of the farm animals as well. So when I was there, Scarlett, the other 4-year-old twin, has a knife. I don't know if you can see in the photo, but it's about this long, sharp kitchen knife, and she's chopping walnuts to mix into yogurt for her snack. And her mom's just there. She's present. She's available as Scarlett needs her, but she's already taught her about knife safety. She's already trained her in how to use a knife, and she's trusting her to do it. And not every 4-year-old can do this, right? So I understand you know your kid best and what they're ready for, but after I visited with his family, I realized, oh my gosh, I'm doing so many things for my kids that they could be doing for themselves. I'm interrupting their ability to gain all of these skills by doing it myself better and more efficiently. So I came home from this visit really kind of humiliated, right? Because I had 8 and 10-year-old kids, and they were really not doing a third of the things that the Jackson kids were doing. So I resolved I was just going to let them do more around the house, train them, give them more opportunities. And shortly after I came back from that trip, I was driving home from a work event, and I needed to change quickly at home and then go to a school event. I wasn't going to have time to make myself food. So I called home thinking I would get someone in the house who likes to cook. And instead I got Ava, the baby, who never really has to lift her finger because everyone else is preparing food. But I figured, okay, I'll give it a shot. I said, Ava, I'm running late and I have to change clothes and then go to the school. I don't have time to make myself food. Would you be willing to make me a couple of quesadillas so I'm not hungry for the rest of the night? And to my surprise, she said yes. Mom, how do I make them? So I gave her 5-step instructions for making quesadillas in the microwave. And I came home to find a paper plate with 2 quesadillas and a neatly folded napkin and this beaming child who was so happy that she contributed to really want to contribute. They want to be able to do things to show how they can be capable. So what are the ways we can build our kids' capability? Household chores, right? It's a little counterintuitive, but there's all this happiness research that when we are doing simple things around the house, we actually have higher levels of happiness and well-being. And if you think about it, the reason is if you can just do something perfectly and then immediately see the impact of your actions, whether it's making your bed 5 minutes in the morning and the whole room looks nicer, you get that little jolt, I have one thing off my checklist, right? The same holds for our kids. When they make a meal that their family enjoys, they immediately get that payoff. It's really, really powerful. So introducing household chores can be a great way to build capability, anchoring positive traits. This is what I was talking about before. When you see your kid doing something that you're trying to encourage, right? Notice it even if it's really small. So it can be that, you spent 10 minutes trying to work through that homework problem, or 2, right? And a month ago, you would have crumpled up the paper and gone and cried in your room for half an hour. That's really what I call perseverance, or generosity, or all the things we want to cultivate in our kids. It's easy to notice when they're not doing it, right? It's easy to call that out, but that's not going to build their sense that they can do it. Instead, we need to look for those small moments when they're showing signs of being generous or controlling their emotions or all the other things we're working on. Letting our kids fail, right? This may be the hardest thing in the whole presentation is when you see your child going into a test unprepared, right? Walking into a friendship situation that they're not going to handle well. And of course, we try to give them the tools, we coach them, but we also have to know when to let go and let them experience the consequences of their choices, because they're going to learn from that much more powerfully than from us, like smoothing the way for them. So if you've ever heard the saying, we want to prepare the child for the path, not the path of the child. We want to really let them have those bumps and bruises early, right? And it can seem like the stakes are high, right? If you don't do well in 4th grade math, you're not going to get into that 5th grade accelerated program. Or if you don't do well in 9th grade, what are colleges going to think? But it's better to learn now in 4th grade or 7th grade or 9th grade than in college, right? We don't want to be that parent calling their child in medical school to wake them up every morning, right? So better for them to fail now, learn the lesson now, and then build fresh handle. Support conflict, they love to be asked for their opinion. It shows we respect them, and they'll often follow up. Hey, what did you do in that work situation? Or did you take my advice about talking to your friends on that thing? So it's another really great way to build their sense that they're valued. And then teaching kids emotional awareness, role playing if they are going into that tough friendship situation, like helping them talk through it, pretend to be a friend, how they can handle it. It can be a great way for them to see the practice. So all of this giving kids choices, right? Giving them their option of how they're going to handle things, letting them fail, can mean they're not going to make the choices we would have wanted them to make. And I don't know about you, but I have been on this planet for many decades. I have a lot of experience. I know how to handle situations, and I would love to just transplant it into my kids' brains, right? So they can avoid that pain and the mistakes. But we all know that it doesn't work that way. They have to experience life for themselves. And I saw this really, really early in this research that I was doing when I took my kids to a preschool fair. It was a fundraiser for the preschool. I've never been to one of these where like there's stations all over the room and you buy tickets when you come in and then the kids can spend the tickets on the stations to do little like sand art. Marshall Tahar Michelle had this very famous psychological experiment that showed that children who were offered a marshmallow but told if they waited to eat it, they would get two. The kids who could wait were much more successful in school and life. I was a little stressed because I have marshmallow eaters, like they would have eaten that first marshmallow without even thinking. So I was like, okay, how can I build their self-control and delay their gratification? I wanted them to work on maybe their math skills. They have to count and add and subtract to figure out which stations they could do and still have enough tickets left. I have all these ideas for what we were going to do at this preschool. I'm going to get a little bit nervous because I happen to know that they had to go in the bouncy house or it would not be a pleasant day, right? The bouncy house was the one kind of freaking out and thinking, okay, can I like grab one child under each arm and duck out the fire exit so my friends don't see them screaming, or how am I going to handle the situation? But as I watched them go up to the lady taking tickets for the bouncy house, they said something, and to my surprise, pushed off their shoes and went into the bouncy house. So 10 minutes later, they come back, red-faced, happy, sweaty, came over to get their shoes and leave. And they said to my daughter, what happened? How did you get into the bouncy house? I thought you only had one ticket. She looked up at me and said, well, I asked the lady, would you be willing to take one ticket? And she said yes. So what had they learned in that preschool fair? Self-advocacy, right? Communication skills. And in life, you know, what are the chances that you're going to always perfectly anticipate everything? Maybe just as valuable that they can handle something on the fly and negotiate. We can come back to them in the Q&A. We do have consequences, but we want consequences that teach our kids the skill we want them to learn, not that just punish them and make them mad at us. So a consequence will be a teaching moment if it follows this 4 R's rule. It's related to the child's action, reasonable in scope. It's revealed in advance so they know it's going to happen and they can actually make an informed decision. And it's respectful of the child, but also of us as a parent. Very simple example is if our child has a habit of leaving their bike out on the lawn when they play with it, we talked about it, right? So what would be a consequence for that? Well, you can't take away screen time. That is not related, right? It has to be something about that. Maybe they lose the bike for 2 days if they leave it out because we want them to learn to get it. So that's related. We reveal it in advance. It's reasonable. They don't lose the bike for good, right? They don't lose it for a year with the consequence. If it never happens again, fine. It doesn't matter. But we have to always make sure that our kids are making intelligent decisions with the end in mind. And the way we get to a consequence is negotiating agreements. And that can happen at family meeting, or it can happen on the fly if there's something a child really wants to negotiate. And this is sort of the steps to negotiate agreement. So you want to introduce the problem as much as possible, not being about the people. You kids are on your screens too much, but the problem is screens distracting from family time and sleep, right? So invite the child's perspective. Yeah, it's really fun, and you want to talk to your friends, and I realize that. So how are we going to deal with my concerns as well as yours? Brainstorm solutions, tweak it sometimes, but to be a kind of curious scientist type mode where you're seeing what works, expecting that it'll take some time, and in the long run, learning will happen. So just to recap, if it feels like it's harder to parent than you thought, it's because it is. Right? Kids are fundamentally different now. 1 and 2 will have a motor behavioral disorder. And so we just need a lot more new tools and strategies for helping them learn to self-regulate than our parents did with us. And the key really is to focus on that self-regulation, which happens through connection, communication with our kids, and building their capability. And if there's only one thing you take from this talk, I hope it's this new mindset. When your kid is acting out, refusing to do something, or falling behind in school, it's not a disaster, right? It's not a sign that you failed as a parent or that they're going to be living in a van by the river, right? This is our new normal. This is just what all of us are dealing with. And it's a clue to say, okay, this is a signal to me. I'm so glad I have this opportunity to try to figure out what's the skill you're missing. How can we work together to get you where you need to be? And it's much better when we notice it and our kids are signaling to us that they need help than for them to fly under the radar and not get that support in managing their emotions, behavior, and thoughts. So thank you all so much. Happy to stay in touch. So take my contact information. I'm happy to hear from you on social media or by email, and I'm happy to take questions as well. Yes.
Can you look at the 4 R's for not turning in homework assignments?
Yes.
Or homework or other assignments or completing things?
Yes. So homework.
No more homework.
Great.
Well, I
Sign me up.
do think that it can be helpful to negotiate with the school if you feel like your kid is getting too much busy work. But yeah, they're not turning it in. So ideally, homework is between the child and the school, because our relationship with them as parents is really, really important to them. It's the foundation for their self-regulation. So our job is to provide them a time, help them figure out a time when they're going to do homework, a place where they're free from distractions, and support that. And then after that, it's really up to the teacher to enforce the consequences. And what I'll say to you is that it's really helpful to have time limited, because for some of our kids, homework will stretch all afternoon, right? So if they say homework is 3:30 to 4:30, let it be that out. And I think a good rule of thumb is 10 minutes per kid, per grade of school. So if you have a 3rd grader and they're spending more than 30 minutes of homework, I would talk to your school, right? Or tell the teacher, they spent 30 minutes on this is how far they got, can you please let me know how I can support them? And make it time limited, and then they will eventually learn to use that time.
I agree with you, and I do relate to if you don't give them time limit of forever, but a lot of it is actually getting it turned in. Now, in today's age, it's actually nice because the teachers can go back, look at the metadata, and see that, yeah, I actually did it 3 weeks ago. Never turned it in, but it was done and not altered and done 3 weeks ago. But somehow, kind of we can go that hump, because here at the end of the 3rd quarter, we were failing math as of yesterday because there were 4 assignments not turned in. We had 56.
What grade?
9.
9th grade.
Or excuse me, 8.
8th grade, okay. Yeah, so I think really that is a skill issue. And I think that he probably feels just as
Welcome to spend.
I just
want as bad about it as you do.
But we just had a meeting in school, and we were looking at the carrot and the stick
Yeah.
and trying to choose between the two, and obviously it should be rerouting.
Yeah,
I'm like, I have to I'm sorry. I'm like, my inhibition.
Oh, sure.
And it's like my teacher and everything. So the cue there too is when we were younger, we used to get an environmental cue to turn something in because we would pass it forward. They don't have that, especially with turning something digitally online. So that sounds to me a little bit like a self-monitoring deficit of actually clicking the submit button. I even have students who attach it and don't hit turn it in, so it's marked as missing in a grade book. So it really is exactly, I think, what I don't want to step on Catherine's toes, but the carrot or stick is not the solution there. It's the self-monitoring that he needs to.
And we also have the balance of, then there's the, why isn't anything turned in? So we'll go click all the buttons, and everything's now turned in,
But
maybe that's what's actually done.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's kind of the balance between actually getting the things turned in that are done versus actually just clicking everything off so that, well, I have the mom that check, therefore I've turned in on every box so that they can't see that things have done.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Same
and I'm happy
thing.
to troubleshoot a little bit more afterwards, but I would say, help him come up with, how is he going to remind himself, right? Is it going to be like a sign on in front of his desk that, is in bright letters, did you turn it in? And that sign will work for two months, and then we'll need a new strategy, right? So we're going to help our kids brainstorm what's going to work for you. that will remind you and remind me, feel free to come up. Yes, question about reading. Yes.
And my question is,
No, do not pay for chores. So chores are something we do as a family because we all contribute. But ask them what they want to learn to do first. So that's a great way to introduce household chores is, hey, look at this list. What would you like to learn? And it's usually something with a knife, right, sharp, or a fire, like putting on the stove, right? It'll be something probably dangerous. So you're going to teach safety rules first, right? So, but when you start with what they're interested in, then they're motivated. And then once they're contributing in any way to the household, then you can, after a couple months, say, hey, how do we divide up the work of the household?
I'm not sure if I heard you. How do your family
Yes. Yes, so allowance is given regardless of whether people have done a choice. Yeah, so allowance is just, no, it's not based on behavior. It's just based on if they're at the family meeting, they get the allowance. And yeah, it's at the end of the family meeting. And so they have practice, because it's really about, this is another really important skill. We want our 18-year-olds to leave our house ready to go out and get that first credit card, because they're going to be marketed to, right, in college, and spend their money responsibly. So better for them to learn at 5 or 10, that they wasted all of their allowance for 6 months on something that broke, right? And you can have family rules about, like, it's not all going to be fruit sweets, right? But it's basically practice.
That's one more
Yes.
follow-up question, that, and I'm assuming based on what you're telling me, I know the answer, I want to run it by.
Yeah.
Probably in this structure, thinking, we don't take away allowance ever either. It's not like something that would be a consequence.
Right.
Because that would all take away
Right.
the opportunity to
And-
learn, and
right.
it's just you want to separate.
Right, and also I will tell you, our children, they don't really need money. So at some point, they'll be like, I don't really need the money, so I'm not doing my chores. Or I don't care about my behavior because I don't care if you take it away. We want them to behave and to cooperate with our family because we have social connection with them, because they feel obligated to us because of our relationship, not because they're getting paid. Okay, yes.
Well, do you do your family meetings once a week?
Yes.
Okay, and then they get an allowance for the week? And
Yes.
it's just a set allowance,
Yes.
not based on anything?
Yes.
Got it.
And I also love it because if you're at the store, they're like, oh, can you buy this? Did you bring your wallet? Oh, you forgot your wallet. Okay, well, next time we go to the store, bring your wallet. Then you can buy that for yourself.
What range do you use, just,
A lot of people do like
She's
a.
throwing around her.
I know. Well, I generally just do like $1 per age. So like maybe start at 4 or 5 when they're 4 or 5, and then by the time they're 15, they're getting 15. And I don't want to go over, but if there's another question, we can take one last question. Yes.
So I was listening intently about the connect and correct.
Yes.
And here's my concern. I put my arm around my child and said, really kind. That's a nice video, makes you laugh. Now it's time to get on with it. The problem I have is that you raise a child, you don't want to raise a child who's a tree hugger, right? I mean, to go out in the real world, the professor will not do that.
Yes.
You don't pen in your assignment.
Yes.
You fail the grade. You
Yes.
fail the course. They work for a boss. He doesn't say, oh, wow, yeah, that's a really nice video. When are you going to get that report to
Yes.
me? It's
Yes,
due by the
no,
end of the day.
I totally understand.
That's the problem I have.
I totally understand your concern, and I'll just share this with everyone because it's what my mom said to me. My Chinese mom from Singapore was like, why are you being so like touchy-feely with them? Because the world isn't going to be all touchy-feely. They're going to have this expectation, and I will say to you that our relationship with our kid is this safe foundation that builds their confidence and their ability to go out and handle that rough world. And the world is going to be harsh enough to that they're going to learn it there. Our relationship is what we need to protect and give them that security. And don't worry, if anyone who has sat through a kindergarten day knows that there's a lot of bumping and elbowing and hard edges that they are going to experience negativity, right? But they don't need to experience it from us.
Yes.
And it's just also not effective. So it's not going to get us the result we want in the moment, and it's also not going to build their foundational strength. And there's so much evidence that parental criticism and negativity erodes our kids' mental health. It can really contribute to eating disorders, even schizophrenia. It's much harder for people who relapse from schizophrenia, their family members are negative. So I think that there's just so much powerful evidence that our encouraging strong relationship with them is really, really fundamental to their well-being, that we don't need to worry about being realistic, because the world is realistic.
But I just don't want them to fail.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you don't want them to fail
I know.
when they're outside.
The failing is another word for learning. And, I will only say this, that time goes by so quickly, right? I'm one of the ones who have launched a child who had a very difficult time. And there are so many speakers that have come and talked. You've seen Rachel Bailey and talked about yuck and, the 5 areas that actually help kids not be in yuck. If you can all imagine kind of what yuck is, and yuck is taken out on you. And my son didn't have any friends, really had struggled, had every letter, 80, blah, blah, blah. I said he stood in every line, these allergies and this, he really struggled. But when you're dropping him off at college, you don't wish you yelled at him more, right? When you're dropping him off at college, the thing that you really want them to have is that feeling of strong connection, that feeling that they have those skills, that feeling, you know what I mean? And it's hard because they're struggling and they're taking a lot out on us because we're the safe place. We are the safe place. And I rarely lost it with my son. And my husband did a good job of that. So we were kind of balancing each other out. But he was very humorous too. And at one point I just said, I can't take it anymore. Last year of high school, it was so horrible. And he said, if I don't take it on you, I'll take it on myself, and I can't do that. I just can't take it. You can take it better than I can. So he saw my strength because I did, not to brag or anything, but I did think I followed a lot of those, I can handle your anger. And he knew I was that safe place. And not everybody has that in extreme circumstances, and everybody has to find stuff that's right for them. But, he took the slow roll, and he failed over and over and over again. And he's now succeeding because he learned. And a lot of kids, if you look at this school example, they're so smart that they don't really have to learn how to fail. They can't be an AP math or honors math because that means an hour worth of homework every single night. It's not that they can't do the math, they just can't keep up with all that homework all the time. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I was smart, now I'm not smart anymore. No, right? So you have to teach the skills. The skills matter more as a foundational level. So I I'm agreeing with all what you're saying. So.
No, and I know it's hard. It's really hard to see our kids, headed into disaster. And I'm certainly not perfect at this myself, but when you read as much research as I do, I would definitely just feel free to look in the bibliography of the book, because it's really, really powerful. It convinced me. And I know you want to raffle off some books.
We have 3 copies of books. So, okay, so we just thought we'd ask some quick questions before you guys let you go out to the world again. So number 1, who can name 3 executive functions that we talked about at the beginning? Sorry.